Hey, second graders, time for Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Chapter 6, The Never Want to Go to Better Cures. I think this one might be about kids who don't want to go to bed. I have a couple of those kids at my house. I hope you guys don't act that way. Each evening, as the clock struck 8, Mrs. Gray called Bobby and Larry and Susan. She said, "Come, children, 8 o'clock, and time for bed." She tried to make her voice sound cheerful and happy, but she actually felt like groaning because she knew what was coming. First, Susan. "Oh, we don't want to go to bed now. Please let us stay up a little bit longer. Please, Mother, please." Then Bobby. "We are the only ones in our whole neighborhood who have to go to bed at 8 o'clock. Then Larry. "Mother, nobody, not anybody at all, goes to bed at 8 o'clock. Then Susan again. "But Mother, we have only just started a game." Then Bobby. "Please let us finish this game. Please." Then Larry. "Just one more turn, Mother. It's my turn. Mother, I haven't won a game this whole evening. Please." Mrs. Gray said, "Now, Bobby, Larry, and Susan, you know that if you want to grow up into fine young men and women, you must have plenty of sleep. And I'm sure they teach you that in school. We don't want to grow up. We just want to finish this game," Bobby wailed. Excuse me. And so, and so night after night, poor Mrs. Gray argued and pled and begged with her children to go to bed. And by the time they had finished whining and complaining, it was usually almost 9 o'clock. Mrs. Gray was desperate. Finally, one day she called her friend Mrs. Grassfeather. She said, "Hello, Mrs. Grassfeather, this is Mrs. Gray, and I'd like to find out what time Catherine and Winfred go to bed." "Why," Mrs. Grassfeather said, 8 o'clock, Mrs. Gray. Unless their Uncle Jasper comes for dinner, then I usually let them stay up till 9:30 to hear Uncle Jasper tell about his experiences in the Boer War. That, of course, is strictly Mr. Grassfeather's idea. He not only allows the children to stay up to 9:30, he also pays them with well for listening to Uncle Jasper while he goes to bed. Mrs. Gray said, "Do the children like to go to bed at 8 o'clock?" Mrs. Grassfeather said, "Oh, they're very good about it because they know that if they whine and complain, I will not let them stay up the next time Uncle Jasper comes over, which is about 4 nights a week." As the Grays had no Uncle Jasper, Mrs. Gray realized that Mrs. Grassfeather could be of no help. So she said goodbye and hung up the phone. Then she called Mrs. Gardenfield. "Hello, Mrs. Gardenfield. This is Mrs. Gray, and I have called to see what time Worthington and Guinevere go to bed at night." Mrs. Gardenfield said, "Oh, they go to bed any time after their daddy comes home. You see, Mrs. Gray, Mr. Gardenfield gets home at 4:30, and we have dinner at 5:30, and the children, Mr. Gardenfield and I, all go to bed at 6:30." "6:30?" said Mrs. Gray, amazed. "My goodness, that's early." Mrs. Gardenfield said, "It's not early if you get up at 4:30. Mrs. Gray said, "But who wants to get up at 4:30? "Well, we do," said Mrs. Gardenfield, and hung up the phone in a huff. So Mrs. Gray thought and thought, and suddenly she remembered that only yesterday Dick Thompson's mother had been telling her about the wonderful little woman named Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. And so, even though she had never seen Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, she decided to call her on the telephone and ask her to help with her never want to go to bedders. She said to Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, "I am Mrs. Gray, the mother of Bobby, Larry, and Susan." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "Oh, yes, of course. How are your children? I have not seen them since they've returned from camp." Mrs. Gray said, "Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, Bobby, Larry, and Susan are very well and very cooperative until about 8 o'clock at night. And then they turn into whiny complainers and little non-cooperators." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said. Oh, yes, I see. They are never want to go to bedders, aren't they? Mrs. Gray said. How on earth did you know? Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle laughed and said, Oh, that is one of the commonest of the children's ailments. The moment you said they were good until 8 o'clock, I knew what the trouble was. Mrs. Gray said, Do you know anything to do with them? How about a cure for this hateful disease? Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Oh, that's very simple. Beginning tonight, don't tell them to go to bed. Let them stay up as late as they want. You and Mr. Gray go to bed on time. You are tired, but leave the children downstairs. Mrs. Gray said, But their health. That'll ruin their health. All right, we're going to stop now and we're going to see what happens. Make a prediction about the rest of this chapter, and I'll see you next time.